Hi, I'm Sarah Gonzalez. Welcome to the news and why it matters. Stu, what was the top story?
Environmentalists are telling us we're all going to die, and I always believe environmentalists. So
Do you?
I'll give you the latest update on why you're going to die today.
Oh, good. Okay, great. Pat.
That's always fun to hear.
Yeah.
I'm thinking civil asset forfeiture. An unconstitutional grab of people's money and property.
All right, Jason.
Trump has completely abolished NAFTA. Now we're moving on. Is that even possible?
Yay!
Still, environmentalists, so you're saying you always believe environmentalists?
I do. I always do. They're very important, and they always bring reliable information to the table. There was an environmentalist from Australia who was talking about koala bears. Now, one thing I learned today was that 90% of koala bears have chlamydia. That's something that I just wanted to let you know. 90% of them have chlamydia, so do not hook up with a koala bear.
Are you
That's
joking?
not a good
Hold
idea.
on.
Wait a minute. We've tested 90%,
90%.
100% of all koala bears and found that only 90% of
Or
them have it.
There's a few that don't, and that's why abstinence pays. I don't know. But yes,
You're being
that
serious.
is a legitimate stat. It's koala chlamydia.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's one of the shady things.
But it's a different strain.
It's
not the human strain.
I don't know what they do in Australia, Sarah. I'm not there.
It must be
not
their highly
Australian.
Republican conservative government that's banned birth control.
Like Corey
koala
Gardner.
community.
Corey
Gardner finally
banned
pulled it
birth
off.
control here, and now he's going there and doing it.
Koalas were his test subjects. Finally did it. Got it done.
So this is a woman who's very worried about the koala bears going away and going extinct.
Aren't you?
Not from chlamydia.
90% of them have chlamydia, so am I now. This is new information.
She doesn't
It's
even
important.
mention chlamydia, by the way, in this interview for some reason. But she is talking about how their habitats are going away, and here's what she said.
You have to understand this planet's in trouble. And I believe our Prime Minister did know that, but somehow or other he's lost it. I want your listeners to really think 85% of the world's forests are gone. You've got to start thinking, how does this affect me? And I think we've all become a bit in denial.
In denial. 85% of our forests are gone, which is a big
That's a lot.
That's a lot.
Right? It's
That's
a lot. It's a lot of forest.
That
No
does
wonder.
sound a little bit scary.
No wonder the koalas are out there getting chlamydia.
85% of our forests are gone.
They're just out there just getting chlamydia everywhere. I got nowhere else to go. So 85% of our forests
Well,
are
if you
gone.
couldn't climb a tree, what would you do?
I'd probably go get chlamydia. That's probably
Sleeping
what I'd
around.
do. Yeah.
Until you probably got chlamydia.
So 85% of the forests are gone. Right now there's 4 billion hectares of forest in the world. Now, I don't know what you think is the right amount of forest to cover land. We all know that, there's Antarctica, for example, which we know has never been covered in forest. We know the deserts, right? They're not forest areas. I don't know what the right amount is. I mean, are we supposed to have half of our land covered in forest? How much do we want? It's good to have some forest, sure. The issue with the claim, however, is when you back out the math, for her claim to be true, all land would have to be covered by forest. Now, there's no indication in any point in history that all land on the entire earth was covered in forest. However, even if you cover all land in forest, that doesn't get her to her claim. Also, all of the oceans have to be covered in forest, which is a real problem because I feel like a floating forest would look really strange. How would the fish swim in between the trees? It would be very difficult.
Have you been to Atlantis, though?
Maybe that's where it came from. I don't know. So the other problem with her claim is that even if you covered all of the earth, including the oceans with forests, you'd still have to cover 80% of another earth with forests to get the math to actually work out that we've lost 85% of our forests. There's no indication, thankfully, that we've lost 85% of our forests. I will give her a little bit of credit. I took her claim literally. In the clip, she actually said, or technically said, I want your listeners to believe that we've lost 85% of our forest. So maybe she was just kind of just throwing it out there I want your people to believe that, even though I know it's not true. Either that or she has no idea what she's talking about with this claim. And, again, you hear these things, and I think people just generally speaking, go along with them, right? I mean, it sounds like that could be true, right? We've built a lot of buildings and we've cleared a lot of
It's usually
forests
not that overt, though. It's usually like they take like a stat and they just make it sound really scary.
Yeah.
Like in a world where 0.1 degrees will change in 100 years. And like, wait a minute, you count it up. That doesn't really mean anything.
Yeah. That's why they say the world is warming without giving you how much it's warmed. It sounds a lot less scary when they tell it's 0.9 degrees over a century. That doesn't sound all that scary, even though it could have actual effects. It doesn't. They never tell you those things because it's.
But if you say it's scary and put it in an Al Gore documentary, you're like, holy crap, man.
Really,
gotta do something.
But this is just something that you heard and thought about and, looked into. This isn't something that she made this ridiculous claim and someone debunked her. Right?
Yeah, I mean, no, there's been some people who have looked at it and said, wait a minute, that doesn't seem right. And I can't remember the site that did it. Because, there's a lot of these sites that are just anti-development. And that's the thing here is that people generally look at capitalism as bad. We've got the Democrats, embracing democratic socialism. And those are that is a lot of the activism on the internet. There are a few organizations that actually go out there and say, wait a minute, we've noticed something about the world. It's a lot better now than it was before we had like lights and internet and yummy, Twinkies and such. Those were you know that. Sarah's a big Hostess fan.
No.
But the issue is that development's actually good, and you realize that over time, we've dropped poverty by 80% around the globe. We've been able to cut millions and millions and millions of people who would have died now live. I think it's something like 18,000 people a day around the globe that used to die from hunger and various illnesses now live because of the advances of capitalism and modern society and medicine and all these things.
What about the fat people problem, though? What about the fat people?
Well, people do sometimes eat too much.
They eat too much.
That's true.
Yeah.
Again, that's a really negative way of looking at something like I just described,
they're fat,
isn't
though.
it?
That could create problems.
The fact that some people eat too much, myself included, it really shouldn't dissuade us from praising capitalism for saving billions of people. That kind of seems like it's maybe a good side effect if you want it to be. You have the ability to eat as much as you want. Because there's a million of these out there. There's a ton of them about global warming. One of my favorite ways, if you ever see this happen, one of these things is going down. Whenever they measure CO2 saved in the amount of cars off the road, you're being scammed. Because you can get to these big numbers and it sounds really impressive, and then when you back into it, you're talking a fraction of a percent of global emissions that would do nothing to cure the problem of what they're speaking about. So they like to do that. You say, oh, well, it would take 10 million cars off the road. Well, 10 million cars off the road sounds like a lot, but only about 20% of our emissions come in the United States come from the transportation sector, and we're only about 20% of the emissions of the world. So when you take a small, even tens of millions of cars isn't a big dent in that and would do almost nothing because places like China and India, which are growing so fast, would replace those emissions almost immediately.
If you've ever driven in rush hour in DFW, you know that tens of millions of cars is only like maybe a third what's actually on our freeways.
That's very true. In front of you.
For example, last year during Hurricane Harvey, 1 million cars in Houston were damaged enough that they were taken off the road at one time.
Wow.
500,000 of them were totaled. So 500,000 in that one event were taken off, and you don't even hear about it.
Yeah.
It's so inconsequential to the rest of the country. It's consequential to them, but nobody else is even talking about it.
Pat, there are an alarming number of people that are being affected by civil asset forfeiture. I've been reading.
This I can't believe this has not been deemed unconstitutional yet. People who
or at least being covered
talked about
by national news sources.
Yeah.
I have not seen it. You have to really go digging in local.
Our own Attorney General is trying to push it forward. Is he still?
Yeah.
Our president likes it. Our Attorney General likes it. Why aren't people protesting in the streets of this? People who have their life savings with them in some cases and are driving someplace to buy something with it. Many times have been pulled over and their cash is confiscated. Now, it is not illegal in this country to carry cash with you where you're going. You can take it on an airplane if you want to. You can drive in your car with it. And yet somehow people who are not having any charges filed against them, people who have no evidence that they're drug dealers and earned this money through a drug sale, are having their life savings taken from them. The latest story I just read about for the first time was last Wednesday. The Utah Supreme Court just finally said, hey, I think you have to return $500,000 to this guy you took it from. In 2016, Kyle Savely was following too closely to a vehicle in front of him on a Utah highway. He was pulled over, and they had a drug-sniffing dog with them. And the drug-sniffing dog gave a hit to the car, like something smelled like drugs to this dog, apparently. They found no drugs, but they did find a stash of $500,000, which they took. They didn't have any evidence that there's a dog that smelled something, but about 80 or 90% of our cash has come in contact with some kind of drugs at some point.
Right.
And so a lot of it smells like drugs. So was this guy doing something wrong? Why do you have $500,000 in cash with you? I don't know, but it's America. That's not a crime. Give him back his money. Well, it's been 2 years. He finally took it to the Utah Supreme Court, all the way to the Supreme Court, and they finally said, yeah, you don't have the right to it. But still, he's not received his money back.
Well, and I would wonder who would need to pay for all of his attorney's fees, if that would be something that the state was paying him for, because I'm sure that cost. Yeah, and he's got all his money. The cops have all his money.
He says spend his $500,000 on attorneys and get nothing back in the end anyway. Right. It's as Pat put it, it's incomprehensible that this is happening in the United States of America. We're talking about it as a potential terrible thing that might happen in South Africa. And here it is happening right here. It's incredible. When you there is no crime in taking your property, in putting it in your car and transporting it somewhere. Right. Like, that is not a crime.
Right.
And I can.
We're made to feel like it is, though.
Yeah.
Like, oh, well, he had too much money on him. Why? Right.
Why
is that too much?
I would like to go through just the Bill of Rights infractions that have happened just over the war on drugs in general. It's just insane. There's civil asset forfeiture. There's these no-knock warrants where they go in and they just completely just bust through someone's door. A lot of times those are made mistakes, and sometimes there are fatalities off of that. It's just when you declare war on something inanimate, the government is freed up to do whatever they want by any means necessary to go after that, and it's getting worse and worse. And I don't know if there's even.
Well, and in this case with the money, we're supposed to have a presumption of innocence in this country. So if there's no drugs, you can't just say, well, but I think
he might have drugs.
He might, so maybe. Let's take this.
It's interesting, too. We keep talking, and we've brought up several of these stories over the past year of, people losing $75,000, $500,000, $50,000, $20,000. A story that's not all that interesting is someone losing $500 or $1,000. How often is that happening? Yeah. How often are these, because they're not going to make the news, and the person's not going to fight it, because what are you going to do? You're going to spend way more than $1,000 to get it back, so you probably just let it go.
And the government knows that.
Yeah, and so they're just going to keep taking stuff if you allow them to do it. Conservatives, generally speaking, should understand that, big government being allowed to take private property is not a good idea. It's what we complain about potentially happening in South Africa. It's what we complain about with eminent domain here. And this is an even worse example because it's just theft. This is just theft on suspicion. And suspicion is not enough.
Is the goal eventually the money and assets that they seize in this manner, do they get to confiscate and use towards state funds?
Yes.
So that's ultimately the goal.
Yeah.
They do.
Yeah. They're using it to pad their budgets after they've had terrible policies for decades. They spent way too much. They promised way too much to voters to get elected. And then, they now need the money, so they're impounding cars, they're taking assets, they're taking real estate, they're taking all sorts of things away from people because they know they can. And occasionally people will complain about it and then go back to their, their business.
Anytime civil asset forfeiture is mentioned and eminent domain, you have to automatically suspect there's going to be some kind of corruption going on in some levels of government. You've got to automatically suspect it. We talked about, was it last week or earlier this week, about Beto O'Rourke. Again, he was, just to rehash, he was a big proponent of eminent domain in El Paso. And then eventually when people started digging into it, they found out that, some of the land that he was trying to seize was strictly for his benefit. Some of his companies were directly involved. Members of his family were part of the companies that he was giving contracts to. Come on. Anytime a politician says this, you got to throw up a red flag. You got to stop, take a step back and say, what is really going on here?
All right, let's talk about NAFTA when we come back. Jason, give us the latest on the new NAFTA deal, which is not NAFTA. Right? It's not going to be called NAFTA anymore.
Well, first, Trump can completely just dismantle NAFTA, get rid of it, and then move on with this deal, correct? Actually, no, he can't. So it's been sounding like, if you've been hearing from some of the statements that he's been saying, is that he's completely renegotiated and then we're moving on with this next deal. First of all, he can't do that. So NAFTA is, he has the power to negotiate these deals and get them ready, but Congress has to actually make them, a thing, a law, and then they're also the only ones that can get rid of them. So there's that. So there's big hurdles as far as what's ahead for whatever he's negotiated right now. But I was reading this article, I think last night, that the Washington Post sent, where they kind of made that point. But they also said all this was doing was making some kind of agreements with auto manufacturers, and they were also basically just doing everything that was in the TPP, and they really kind of downplayed everything else that was involved. Which kind of irritated me. So this is, if yesterday my segment was, destroy democratic socialists, this is my Kellyanne Conway, Corey Lewandowski segment, or in defense of this. So I looked at some of the fact sheets that the treasurer, or the guy that's head of trade, I don't remember his actual
Wilbur Ross or Lighthouser.
But anyway, so they set out, I think it's 4 or 5 different fact sheets where they actually walk through some of the things they're doing. Now, it's way too early to know exactly all the ins and outs of this. And this is very rudimentary. It's like a kindergarten version of what's going to happen in the full agreement. But they did mention manufacturing. So they made it to where it's beneficial really on both sides. So there's a whole lot of incentives for like companies like GM, Chrysler, for them to move back to the United States and manufacture cars here. There's a lot of more, again, that's a whole nother issue. They don't really explain a lot of how that works out. Yeah. But I saw your frown, so I was...
I'm always frowning. I live in America in 2018. So, it does seem like as far as automobiles go, it will probably raise the cost of them. I mean, we don't know yet what the details are on it. And you're right. I mean, there's all you have right now are people guessing. I mean, there's fact sheets from the administration, but obviously they're putting the most positive spin possible on it. Right. The Washington Post did have a column on it. The Wall Street Journal had a column on it today. Both of them, said there are some good things in it and some bad things in it. I would say overall, kind of negatively looking at it right now. But you can't jump on. I don't think you can jump to either side yet without actually seeing the details.
I just don't see how you can be negative about it at this point. They do mention there's a lot more manufacturing details in there. They cover a full range of manufacturing industries, jobs, and companies. But it doesn't really go into full detail on what all is involved. But they also talk about agriculture. There's a lot of agriculture. Stipulations in here and stuff that's supposedly beneficial to both countries. They also update it big time, and they add in all the intellectual property, all the everything that should be in there that wasn't, there's a thing now that wasn't around back in the 90s when they did this. All the tech, upgrades and updates. So basically, the hit was like, yeah, so this is all the stuff in the TPP, and all this stuff would have been done under TPP. Well, I have a huge issue with that because I followed the TPP from its inception, followed all the leaks on it and everything. And the TPP, basically what it is, yeah, it did offer in a lot of the stuff that's in this deal that we're negotiating with Mexico, with one exception. There is no overpowerful, like judicial system that can override federal governments and say, oh, you don't like this? Well, tough. You still have to do this in your town, or your county, or whatever. There's nothing like that. That existed in the TPP, which was extremely dangerous, in my opinion. And I've been saying from the beginning, like we shouldn't be going after these large, mega, trade pacts. We don't need that. We don't need a large organization that can tell the U.S. government what they can and can't do. We need to do the same types of agreements, but go directly to those specific countries. Go to Mexico and do a deal. Go to Canada and do a deal. Go to every other single country in the Pacific, which we basically already have. When we did the TPP, we already had trade deals with those countries. We didn't need to add on top of this, this super judicial system that can govern everyone, and tell them what to do. We don't need that. So I didn't see that angle in any of the reporting on this.
Yeah, and I don't think it's in this at all. I mean, I don't. You have to protect your sovereignty, obviously. We don't know enough about it yet. I know give you one specific thing that looks like it's in this deal, which is, and this is something the Trump administration apparently fought for. Under NAFTA, Mexico was prohibited from, forcibly taking a factory of a U.S. company. Good idea, right? Mm-hmm. Or also regulating companies so that they could favor Mexican companies. So you couldn't come up with new regulations that only taxed American companies and didn't tax Mexican companies. Well, on this new deal, it appears, if it passes as kind of talked about at this point, it keeps the physical barrier there. So you can't, the Mexican government can't just raid U.S. companies, but it takes away the regulation barrier, so that now the Mexican government could pass regulation to favor Mexican companies. The concept being, from the Trump side of things, is because of that, U.S. companies won't want to put their stuff in Mexico anymore. They'll be fearful of this new regulation and they'll keep it here. That's
favor them how? As in subsidies on their end?
Subsidies or tax benefits, or easier to do business in certain ways. They had to keep those laws consistent with U.S. companies and Mexican companies under NAFTA. They don't have to do that anymore if this goes through.
I personally don't have a problem with that.
I do. I think it's protectionist. I mean, what they're trying to do is open up U.S. companies that are doing business there to harm, so that they will come back here. Mm-hmm. And there's no reason to do that. I mean, we should be able to. And I'm a big free trader here. I have no hesitation on that. So I do like that. However, to put something in there that essentially is a poison pill for U.S. companies to do business in Mexico, I mean, that's not going to help U.S. companies. I mean, that's not going to help a company expand here. It's not going to help anybody. I mean, it's going to it may bring some companies back here. Likely, instead, they'll go somewhere else where they don't have to deal with the regulation problems or the prices here. And I just feel like there's a lot of that in here. The people who designed it are very protectionist, and I think when we see the details, we're going to see a lot of that in there.
I definitely see your perspective on that, and I agree. But I also think that some countries that aren't as developed, that have a vast majority of their industry that's kind of focused or centered around one product, mm-hmm. They are in very big danger of getting decimated. And eventually this works out because they have to innovate, just like American oil companies had to innovate. Now we have fracking, and now we produce all of our oil. Mm-hmm. But am I running out of time?
Yes.
But companies, really quick, companies like Mexico, their bean industry was decimated. We outproduced them, decimated their bean industry. We had a huge influx of migrants coming over illegally. Japan, rice. They protect with subsidies their rice industry because it's one of their major industries. So some protections I believe are necessary in the forms of maybe subsidies or something like that, but maybe just in the short run. Maybe it works itself out in the end.
All right. Thank you for that coverage, Kellyanne. Back in a minute.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I It's tough.
Coming up on the podcast and also TheBlaze.com, we have the News and Why It Matters Overtime. For those of you listening to us on the podcast, I just wanted to give you a chance to follow us on Twitter because you're missing out on really great content if you're not already following us and you can't see our little Twitter handles. So I'm at Sarah Gonzalez, TX. You are World of Stew.
At World of Stew.
Okay, Pat.
At Pat Unleashed.
At Jason Buttrell.
At Jason Buttrell. So make sure to follow us because, I mean, hello, who wouldn't want to, right?
I mean, that's true. It's a good point.
We'll see you on Overtime.
Really good point.
Thanks, Stu.